Over the past couple of years, we've experienced some developments and changes, especially in the way that employees remove or steal company data. Um, with the Great Resignation happening now and COVID happening over the last couple years, a lot of the ways that employees are accessing data and ultimately stealing or exfiltrating that data has been changing as well. So we thought we'd take a couple minutes and put together what we're learning and what we're seeing out there when we do our forensic investigations and kind of share it with everybody else. So going to be going over this new trade secret landscape, what some common sources and destinations are for both company and personal data, what these new artifacts look like, and where to find them. Um, Understanding kind of what's out there and giving you some tools and knowledge for how to tackle these matters going forward. We'll cover a couple case studies and then have some takeaways in Q&A. So we've been using this slide in presentations for years now. It's a quote from 1992, but it applies more and more, and that's just computers and smartphones let people make mistakes faster than really any invention in human history. So let's talk about this landscape. Before we get into that, let's just talk about a trade secret from what we're experiencing here today. All the states have some different legislation and variations around what a trade secret is, but for the most part, it has to be a secret. Has to be something not widely known or not widely available. It has to be able to give its owner a competitive advantage, meaning that if it were the hands of a competitor or somebody else, it would give them some knowledge and advantage they typically wouldn't have. And companies have to take measures to secure that data. So they have to be able to demonstrate in some way that they have some security around their data and that they're taking efforts to maintain its secrecy. Typically, on the plaintiff side of these cases, um, the arguments are made that an employee had access to this. They understand that they had confidentiality requirements, employment contracts, and they were given access to this for the course of their normal business, and that this information had a competitive strategy, and the company secured it, and the employee who had access to it basically stole it or walked away from it, walked away with it. On the defense end, we typically see two things. One, the argument that a company didn't do anything or that the information that in question wasn't protected or it's not a secret. And the other one we see, which is sometimes often true, is that even though information may have been taken, it's really not any damage to a company, right? I took it, sorry, you can have it back, no harm, no foul. And again, that can be true in a lot of cases as well. So let's look at a previous company footprint, what we're all used to. Um, it was a workforce that came into an office. And when you were in your office, you accessed all of your work related software and technology. You accessed email from within the office. You might have had remote access to do that as well, but it was at least being maintained and owned by the company. All the file servers and documents were there. All the applications that employees used were all kind of behind the company's firewall and on their premise. What it's moved to now is a very remote workforce. Some people are walking around with, really no company issued devices and just storing data on flash drives. You're able to send and receive email from a beach in Cancun. A lot of employees working from home. We have a large remote workforce. A lot of mobile devices and a lot of mobile users are out there as well. And then, we still have that traditional employee that might still come to the office. And what we're seeing is they're accessing the company through a VPN, which they might have had in the past, but is being used more and more frequently. And companies are offloading a lot of their IT infrastructure to the cloud. They're storing data in Amazon S3 buckets. Their servers are virtual in AWS and Azure. Their email is almost always hosted through Office 365 or G Suite type services now. Um, we have OneDrive for file storage. CRMs are in Salesforce. We have chat that we're using a lot because you can't walk up to somebody in their cube and have a conversation. So there's a lot of chat and Zoom that's happening. Um, and some of this stuff can be hybrid as well. And then the actual employees and your users, your day-to-day life, the cloud is increasing as well. I don't really know anybody that doesn't have a Gmail account. Most of us have a smartphone, whether it's Apple or Android. Those come with iCloud, Samsung Cloud, Google Cloud. We've got personal devices at home, uh, cloud storage and sharing that's available for home users. So we're using the cloud data a lot more in our personal lives as well. Kind of a landscape and understanding some of this technology. When I was doing data theft cases in 2002, a lot of the artifacts we looked for were people burning documents to CDs and DVDs. Computers don't even come with CDs and DVD drives anymore. But once those kind of died off, well, portable storage, USB storage was prevalent. So they went from dragging and dropping files to a recordable CD to just a flash drive, and they could walk around with those. Flash drives got larger and larger, and now the cloud is probably starting to become more prevalent than USB storage devices, and it's not that hard to use. You can just drag and drop files to a browser window instead of dragging and dropping them to a USB drive. So it's you don't need to be tech savvy to use the cloud anymore. We still get that argument every once in a while where, well, we don't really think this person was tech savvy. They're probably not the type of person that uses the cloud. And from an evidence standpoint, we actually do the forensic examinations. That's not what we're seeing. And I just put some dates and times for various services and kind of when they were released to the public to kind of point out that this is nothing new. This is decade-old technology from when it was initially released, and it's been around for a while. Employees are getting smarter. I kind of loved this topic it was actually from Reddit. It was a life pro tip about keeping your work and personal lives separate because there's no expectation of privacy, and employers can monitor corporate devices. It had over 2,000 comments, and they were fantastic to read from the perspective of doing forensics, what people knew and didn't know. They're remote now. They're younger. There's been an evolution of technology, right? The cloud used to be something that was kind of difficult to use. Now it's easy, and it's being baked into our everyday use. As employers are using the cloud to store documents and data, they've been using it for work, so they're more familiar and more comfortable with accessing data in the cloud. So it's not um, it's not a far leap for them to start using it for their home as well. Devices have come a lot more ubiquitous. So every household has computers, smartphones, tablets, even children are running around playing games on iPads, and those have cloud storage connected to them as well. And one of the benefits for the cloud, depending on how you look at it, is you can access the data from anywhere. So I don't necessarily need a work computer anymore. I just need a computer that's connected to the internet, and I can access all the things I need to do to perform my job. I can check email from an iPad. I can check email from a home computer. And there's been around enough CSI episodes and TV that people understand that, you know, activity on computers can be tracked, and things that are deleted, right, doesn't mean they're gone. They're still recoverable in some way. And they're aware that these employers monitor activity. And just to kind of point out like how things are moving and will continue to move. Windows 11 is new. It's not really on a lot of devices or being deployed yet, but it's going to require a Microsoft account to log in. So, when you're setting up your new Windows 11 computer, it wants to be on the internet, and it's going to force you to make a Microsoft account to log into Windows. And that's automatically, when you have a Microsoft account, it's going to give you an Outlook.com address, Skype, OneDrive, the Microsoft Store. And if you're encrypting your home computer, which on Windows 11 is kind of going to be a default, um, all of your encryption keys for your Windows computer are going to be backed up to the cloud as well. So the operating systems, and even Mac and their and the iCloud that's built into Mac computers, more and more they're offloading documents and data to the cloud and requiring cloud accounts. So we've been tracking how data leaves companies when we work on these cases. People still email documents to themselves. There's a lot more cloud storage, and that's up over prior years. And that includes just using things like web browsers to transfer files. People are still copying data to USB devices, but that is shrinking. And mobile devices are becoming more and more prevalent for how data leaves a company as well. If you have an iPhone, all you really need to do is you're signed into your both work and personal accounts on your iPhone. If you have things like iCloud and you're using a personal account with your phone, it's typically backing your phone up to iCloud. It's backing up both work and personal data to a personal iCloud account. So if you leave an employer, and it is a company-owned phone, you turn it in, you get a new phone, and as soon as you pull it out of the box, the iPhone says, "Hey, do you want to restore from a backup?" And you're like, "Yep, sure do." And all that data just comes back down to your personal phone. So let's talk about sources and destinations a little bit. At the root of this, anytime there's data theft or data gets exfiltrated from a company, it requires two elements. You have to have a source, right? You have to be able to access the data itself that you want to steal, and you have to have a destination, somewhere you're going to put it. Um, Anytime there's data theft or an exfiltration, it doesn't always mean that the data was moved, right, or deleted from the corporate servers. It can just be a copy, so everything can still be there. But that source data is typically owned by a company, and it's got some intellectual property. It has value, and it's stored on corporate-owned computer systems that the IT department maintains, and they provide access control. You're providing employees access to that data because it's required to do their job. So their username and password might give them access to certain types of documents or data, but not all, right? Someone that works in HR has access to employment records that maybe the rest of the company doesn't. And generally, companies have contracts, policies, procedures in place that govern how this information should be handled. It's an IT use policy. It's how to deal with corporate-owned devices, how to handle confidential information. So there's documentations and contracts that employees and employers have around the data and how it should be used. And then let's look at destinations, right? So the data moves or gets copied. Where does it go? These destinations are typically outside of the company control. Personal computers that companies aren't managing, USB storage devices that aren't owned by the company, and they're getting mixed in with other personal data. And it's cloud storage accounts, whether that be Google Drive, OneDrive, Gmail, or anything else that people may have data is being moved into the cloud. And typically, personal devices are going to have less security, logging, and auditing features than business type accounts or business devices. So with corporate accounts, right, there's generally good access control, making sure one person can't access another person or department's data. There's a lot of logging that's available in both business devices and business cloud accounts that simply just aren't there for a lot of the personal type accounts. So um, there's a lot more security and a lot more just features on corporate accounts than there are personal ones. And that means it can be difficult to kind of put the genie back in the bottle. So once data leaves a company, and for example, might go to a Dropbox account that's owned personally by someone, there's not a lot of logging and auditing in a personal Dropbox account. So how do you know if it's been synced to other devices or been accessed in Dropbox by another computer or copied somewhere else? So a lot of those logs don't exist for certain types of cloud accounts. So you really don't have any idea once it's left your secure corporate environment where it may have gone. And ultimately this can end up on a competitor, their new employer's systems as well. So let's talk about some ways that we're investigating some of this. But first, let's kind of just look at what computer forensics is. It's really just a specialized technique for collecting, recovering, authenticating, and analyzing any electronic data. We use a lot of artifacts and residual data from computers to kind of reconstruct what happens. And I like to say forensics focuses more on the who, what, how, why, and when. So how documents created, who accessed them, who created them, what happened, did they get printed, did they get deleted? And e-discovery focuses more on the relevance. So we can tell you that a bunch of data was copied, but whether or not it's barbecue recipes or iTunes, photos or music, that kind of falls more in the e-discovery. It's focused on the relevance, which documents are really important to different companies. And we do forensics by looking at artifacts. So as long as a computer or device, doesn't matter if it's a desktop, a laptop, or a cell phone, as long as it's turned on, it's doing something. There's really no such thing as like an idle computer that just sits there and doesn't do anything. So forensic artifacts are predictable, repeatable, and verifiable breadcrumbs that are left behind by the operating system and certain applications when the computer's just running and being used during its normal course of business or normal course of use. What artifacts exist depend. It depends on the kind of device, laptops versus mobile phones. It depends on software versions. Mac OS has different artifacts than Windows. Some of this can depend on how the computer's configured as well. So certain settings can be turned on or turned off, which won't provide certain artifacts or may provide us more information. And time is a factor as well, because a lot of these breadcrumbs that are left behind aren't persistent. They're not going to stay on the computer for its entire lifespan. Um, they're temporary. They'll be stored in logs, and they're not going to be stored forever. So getting quick access to these can matter quite a bit. Windows 10 recently had an update that will actually remove older USB devices. So if you don't get to a computer quick enough, a lot of these older artifacts that we're used to looking at can start to go away. But we can preserve these, recover them, and perform a lot of analysis on them to reconstruct really what happened on a computer or device. And these artifacts kind of fall into two categories. One I call like system attributable, and one's user attributable. So as I mentioned, when a computer's sitting there idle, it's doing something. It may go check for updates. It may run a virus scan. The Chrome web browser may, run a task to say, hey, is there a new version? Let me go out and download and install that. Your antivirus may notice the computer's idle and run a virus or malware check. A lot of that just tells us information about the computer, and some of that can be helpful, just letting us know that the computer's on, it's connected to the internet. And that behavior, even a virus scan, for example, will look very different from a forensic perspective if it's just an automated virus scan that the computer runs periodically, or if you actually opened up your antivirus and said, scan my computer for malware. It looks different because one is just done by the system as part of routine operation, and one was manually done by a user. And that plays into lots of other types of artifacts as well, like internet history, right? It requires a user behind the keyboard to browse to different websites and click on links. File dates and times, things like opening files up, accessing folders, logging on to computers, deleting files, plugging devices in. All of these leave behind artifacts that are attributable to a user or a specific user on a computer, as opposed to the computer just functioning as part of its normal course. So there's kind of a methodology that we use to analyze trade secrets. And we'll walk through these, but it involves an event, some scoping, data acquisition, forensic analysis, some sort of reporting or updates, and potentially, depending on the findings in the matter, some remediation as well. So the event. Every matter starts with an event. People don't just turn computers over and ask us to do forensics on them for fun. There's usually something that happened. It could be a key employee resigning or even a whole department that resigns. Companies can start losing business. They'll lose a bid or a sale to a competitor and they think they may have an insider or some data leaks. Some companies, larger ones, will have data loss protection or DLP type software that actually monitors for certain types of events. And they can get alerts from those, letting the IT department know um, that users are moving documents around that they shouldn't have access to. After hours activity, we've seen situations where key card access to a building has happened at 10:30 at night, and they're getting alerts on that, and they're wondering why employees are carding into a building at 10:30 at night. So they'll kind of want to do an investigation to figure out what happens. Um, Lots of employees will leave and go work for a competitor, and businesses are concerned that the pricing, the clients, and other information that they had access to while employed there um, might harm them in some way and might give that competitor an edge that they typically wouldn't have. So there's generally some sort of event um, that happens that causes companies to want to do a forensic investigation. And understanding what that is important. And that helps us kind of build out a scope. What are you really looking to do? Um, Asking three whys, making sure that what they're asking for or what they want to investigate is really sort of on that device. And there's some constraints that we can use here as well. Um, what did the employee have access to? How long ago did this happen? Is it only certain clients or certain information that you need to look at? What's the sense of urgency? And that kind of helps us build out, well, what are we going to look at as part of this investigation? Not everything may be in scope. And we do this to kind of help maintain costs associated with this investigation as well. When it comes to collecting the data, once we've sort of identified what that scope is, um, it's really pretty simple for us to go out and collect laptops, mobile devices, even remotely. or have devices sent to a lab, or have a forensic examiner come on site and collect a lot of this data. We do run into encryption every once in a while, which is fairly easy, especially from a corporate standpoint, to get past, because the IT department has the keys that allow us to do that. And cloud data is actually very, very easy to collect because, well, it's in the cloud and you can access it from anywhere. There's no location that you need to be in to pull down data from servers that are stored in the cloud. And once we have all this data, we do a lot of analysis on it. We look at what we refer to as MAC times, or modified access changed. So files have dates and times associated with them. And as users use a computer, right, they're creating new files, they're saving documents, they may be accessing them in some way. So a lot of these file dates and times allow us to determine a pattern of activity. If 1,000 files get created on a computer or device at one time, they're generally copied from somewhere else. If 1,000 files are accessed within a period of a couple minutes, that's usually indicative of things like copying, right? Not things that happen on normal day-to-day usage. So we take a look at what have people been opening? What are they saving recently? What are the documents they use most frequently? Has anything recently been deleted? Is there any evidence of cloud-related activity, whether that be webmail accounts or any cloud storage that may exist? We can filter this down by keywords, by file types, and we do a lot of filtering and searching. But really, from everything that exists on computers and different logs and audit data that we get, you can almost rebuild a person's day from events that occur when they just open the lid of their computer and turn it on, log in, uh, to different meetings they may have had throughout the day, artifacts from things like Zoom and GoToMeeting, emails sent, received, documents they open, browsing history. You can almost rebuild a minute by minute timeline of what someone's doing on their computer on a daily basis. And we've been asked to do that, especially for employment cases where it involves maybe terminating someone for performance reasons. We'll see computers that just don't have any activity from 9 to 5 on Monday through Friday. So they're either not using that device or they're using another device. And once we find a lot of these events, we use them to kind of pivot. So things will pop up when we're doing our forensic analysis. After hours login and activity. They're on their computer logging in, accessing files at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night. Is that normal behavior or is that a unique occurrence? I mentioned like clusters of file activity, lots of files being created or accessed or modified at one time. Internet activity, even what Wi-Fi networks they're connecting to and how frequently they've connected to, and if they're new Wi-Fi networks. Email, software usage. In general, we try to build like a story that matches what this person's been up to for a period of time. And generally, everyone takes something, but the question is it a secret? I use barbecue recipes a lot because there was a scenario we worked on where an individual had basically backed up their barbecue recipes. They were competition barbecue pitmaster, and they had a lot of their recipes stored on their work computer. The individual worked there for 15 years, and on his way out the door, um, he bought a giant USB thumb drive from Best Buy and plugged it into his computer and backed up a ton of barbecue recipes. So it wasn't necessarily a secret. There were no corporate documents that came. Um, they'll back up personal photos, tax returns, resumes. There's lots of information that could exist on a corporate computer that's not going to be considered a secret. So once we kind of do that analysis to figure out what happened, it's up to the plaintiff or the company to kind of figure out, well, what's this data worth and what are you going to do about it? how much information they took, where it went, all may play factors into this. But generally, they want to sort of stop the spread of this information, making sure that if it is a company confidential document or something that does have value, it's at least removed from that ex-employee's possession and can't be accessed anymore. An investigation report. So, the conclusion of the investigation should give you some information and facts related to what our findings were and provide you with information that's actionable that you can determine what you want to do and how you want to handle your matter. But in general, there's really just a quick basic anatomy of a preliminary findings report. It's the scope, right? What happened and what were we asked to do? It's going to list out materials reviewed and considered. So what did we look at? Did we look at a mobile phone? Did we look at a laptop? Did we look at a cloud account? It's just listing the sources of data that we looked at. Some notable findings. So just kind of a bulleted list of um, notable events that we found that came to our attention, and then some supporting materials for review because we're not experts in all of the different aspects of your business. So provide a lot of exhibits of things like, well, here's the last 14 days of internet history and all the different sites that a person went to, just in case something jumps out that we may not be aware of or haven't been told to look for. And we can do these in sort of an oral or written form. Um, and we generally mark them, and should be marked just attorney-client privileged and preliminary findings because these are very, very early stage investigations. Things will often change um, as the matter progresses. But the good thing about these is that if need be, they can really quickly be turned into an affidavit or expert report if it's needed to help support the matter. Remediation. So, if something was taken and we want to make sure that it's removed and gone, it works best when everyone's on the same page. I mentioned with a lot of these cloud accounts, it's kind of hard to put the genie back in and certify with 100% certainty that every copy and instance of something that may have been taken is gone. So writing a protocol for what we're going to be doing, what we're looking for, and what those remediation steps look like is helpful for all parties. And that lets us go into personal computers, personal accounts, devices, storage, USB storage devices, and remove it. And we remove it in a way that, the end user generally can't access it anymore. They would have to go through huge steps to be able to basically recover a lot of this information. So it's kind of like, what does good enough look like? Is it every home computer, the kids, iPad? If it's a family iCloud account, are things getting synced to a spouse? How far down the rabbit hole do you want to go? And then certification that it was actually done. And generally, along with remediation, we'll provide a report of what we found, where we found it, and the fact that we've removed it and the user no longer has access to it. And we'll certify to that. But there's always that one chance that it might have gotten backed up to somewhere else that we don't know about. So usually there's some sort of affidavit or something from the custodian certifying they don't have any other additional copies that you can keep and put on file. So let's talk about some artifacts and kind of where to find them. Remembering that a copy involves both a source and a destination, and artifacts will exist in both locations and sometimes up to even 3 locations. So there's multiple places to look for this evidence. The source, right, where documents got copied from. It could be mobile devices, servers, file shares, a laptop or desktop computer, or just a cloud account. Office 365 has SharePoint / OneDrive, and I can access that from anywhere. So the device that actually does the copying will have information as well, whether that be a work or personal computer or mobile device. There's apps for all of this, and I can log into Dropbox from my mobile phone and start saving documents down uh, to my iCloud storage right from within Dropbox. So the destinations can be USB storage devices, the cloud, personal computers, and all of these are going to have different types of artifacts, especially the cloud. But a general rule of thumb is kind of working from the keyboard out. So when there was a theft that occurred, again, that's a user attributable kind of forensic artifact. Uh, there has to be fingers on a keyboard. So where did that happen? What device did that happen from? That's typically going to contain the most information. So, and we're going to go through some data sources from the cloud and show how some of those activity from the cloud can be available to us to kind of even supplement our forensic examination, and in some cases provide information or evidence that we're not going to have from even a corporate computer. So I just did a couple screenshots here. If you have a Gmail account, you have Google Drive. It's part of your Google account. It's not really a Gmail account, it's a Google account. All the other Google services come with it. So if you have files being sent from a corporate account to a Gmail account, it's actually just as simple as in there, just saving that file to Google Drive. And there's nothing in Gmail that's going to tell you that that occurred unless you start looking at other storage locations within the Google account, such as Google Drive. Um, Microsoft accounts, we talked about those with Windows 11. Everybody's going to have one. That's going to come with OneDrive, and that can sync data directly from your desktop and documents folder to OneDrive. And that may happen automatically. Things like Dropbox, when you look at things like a Dropbox account, it will list all of the devices that are connected to it, even web browsers that have recently accessed that device. So with Dropbox, every device that Dropbox is installed on will have copies of that data. So just looking at my personal Dropbox account, I had 4 devices that were connected where they're in sync. So anything I can access from one device, I can access from other devices as well. Lots of companies are on Office 365 or Microsoft 365, and there's a huge amount of audit data there that's available. Um, there's a lot of audit data that's available and turned on by default. You do have the option, and some companies do turn on specific additional levels of auditing, all the way down to like message level auditing. Um, every time you view and access an email with message level auditing, we can get that kind of information. So this is kind of just a sample that I redacted out from an Office 365 environment. And I can get the user ID, when the events were created, and different kinds of operations that happen. And I can see IP addresses and file names for what is being accessed, and files being previewed, files being downloaded, files being deleted, all in real time. So having this type of data to look at along with the actual device is extremely helpful, because um, we can look at both, like say a laptop computer and Office 365 audit logs, and oftentimes we're able to determine that the activity on the computer doesn't match what we're seeing in Office 365. And the IP addresses that we see will often vary as well. And that's just really showing that the account's being accessed from another device somewhere. Um, where data theft may have just occurred by simply uh, taking a personal laptop or a personal iPad and logging in Office 365 and downloading everything that you want to steal or take from a company without ever using company computers as well. Another one that's out there that a lot of people don't know about that was worth bringing up are Google Drive artifacts. Uh, this is a personal Gmail account that I have that I really don't use for anything. It's kind of just a throwaway. But Google Drive has audit logs available to it, even on a personal account. The ones that you would get from like a G Suite or a Google Apps business account are even more robust. But a Google Drive will have artifacts for creating new documents, renaming them, editing them, deleting them, and just my personal Gmail account goes back to 2015. So, and again, there's not a lot of documents in here, so we can get thousands and thousands of records for creations of documents that are saved to a Google Drive from an email account or shared with other individuals, edited and different version histories of documents as well. So having some of this knowledge, the important things to remember here are a lot of these logs and artifacts don't last forever. Most systems have around a 30-day window. It'll vary between personal and business accounts. Box.com personal accounts are only 21 days. Dropbox is 30. Office 365 can be 90. So they vary, but they won't stay around forever. And we kind of put together a checklist for the employee resignation, right? Making sure you get all of the company issued devices back. Not just the laptop, but any smartphones they may have or USB devices that they may have used as part of your employment. Reminders to not send them to the IT department. When you send something to the IT department, as helpful as they will typically reuse that equipment or turn it over to a new employee, wipe it. They will turn it on and maybe back up the files that are on that device and provide them to someone else. So a lot of what the IT department will do when they get access to a computer can kind of negate what we're trying to do from a forensic standpoint. So making sure those devices stay sequestered, and obviously during the employee's exit interview, make sure they've returned all that corporate data. They're not in possession of anything. Um, you know, reminding employees on the way out the door that they've signed confidentiality agreements or non-competes, and making sure that they're notified that they're kind of still in place after their employment. People leave and switch jobs all the time. There's nothing necessarily nefarious about that, but reminding people of their duties and obligations is extremely helpful. So I wanted to break into a couple of case studies. Um, the one we had was a Fortune 1000 staffing firm recently, and there wasn't really much cause for concern when an employee left. But the following day and over the course of the next week, there were 7 to 10 other people that also resigned went to go work for the same competitor. And we run into situations where it was a concerted exit, right? It was a planned exit. They were in on it for a long time. So part of the investigation was how long have they been looking to do this, and what did they take on their way out the door, and how much harm may this cause for the company. Um, in this situation, there was one person that was kind of in charge of, and they actually had an email thread that we found that they were using over Gmail. It wasn't corporate. We found one person that was kind of the ringleader behind this, and everybody had their own sort of job and responsibility. One person was going to back up their Salesforce data for everyone before they went out the door. Another person was going to um, get access to some recent documents and contracts, so they had some language that they can use. So everybody had different roles or responsibilities, but they were all in on it. We had another SMB data analytics firm. It was kind of a boutique firm, and they had a head of sales that had been around for a long time. And through just forwarding a random sent email, somebody had noticed that this individual was BCCing themselves to a personal email on basically everything. Every email that this employee sent was automatically BCCing a personal Gmail account and had been doing so for a long time. And this was kind of brought to their attention as well when they got a notification for MailChimp, which is like a CRM email newsletter that had all of their contacts. And MailChimp had been downloaded. They got a notice. John Smith has downloaded your contacts out of MailChimp. Looking at the work computer, uh, there was no browsing history for MailChimp. There was no files being downloaded out of MailChimp. Uh, that had all been done from a personal device. And looking then at the personal device, there were a lot of USB devices that were attached to it and a lot of corporate files that were on it. One of the USB devices that we identified by make, model, and serial number was actually in the custody of the employer. So the employee had basically taken a work backup drive home, plugged it into a personal computer uh, that was being used by the CEO, backed up all of the CEO's data from the CEO's backup drive, put it on a personal computer, and then brought the backup drive back to the office. So um, really, no artifacts on the work computer. It had all been done elsewhere. And then something that we're seeing more and more is, you know, somebody will leave, they will want to do forensics on their device, but they just weren't quick enough, or IT is really, really fast, and the device has been completely wiped and reset, and there's just no data available on it. And this is happening more and more. But again, not everything is lost, even in those situations where devices have been wiped or reset because they were using cloud data. So a lot of the audit logs that I showed from Office 365 before, you can pull all of that. We can get access to their desktop, their OneDrive, different versions of files they may have had, and all of that file activity that's available there. Even without the computer, allowed us to kind of recreate what someone was doing for the weeks prior to the departure without a computer, because the computer and the cloud were so tightly integrated at that point. So the in short, just some key takeaways. Um, no matter where you are, which side, plaintiff, defense, preserve early, making sure that electronic data and those logs stay available to you, because they do have a tendency to get overwritten as time passes. Just a reminder that not everything's on the laptop. There are lots of other locations to keep in mind as companies broaden and start to use more and more cloud services. And cloud services are being built into our day-to-day lives. There's a whole other wealth of information that's out there that's just not on a laptop. And regardless of how smart people are, there are artifacts that will be left over. Even if you do things like securely wipe your computer or securely delete and shred files, there's at least artifacts left behind that says that occurred. When in doubt, joint protocols can save time and money, especially when everyone's in agreement, especially on the remediation phase, if that happens. And our job is to always get this resolved quickly. So companies generally don't want to litigate just for the sake of litigating. We try to do our best to go in and get access to the data that we need, limit it down, provide notable events and findings, and just be there as that trusted advisor to provide the advice and make sure that whatever happened, it gets settled, it gets remediated, and companies can go back to their normal day-to-day work of making widgets and generating revenue. So I think that's all I had for today. Does anybody have any additional questions to kind of follow up with?
So thanks, Chad. We actually have a couple of questions that have come in, and just a friendly reminder that all questions are anonymous. They can be asked through the Q&A control panel in your Zoom window. So Chad, the first question is, if a current employee is accessing cloud accounts from their personal device, how would an organization be able to detect that?
Um, Great question. So there are things that corporations can do that will only allow company-owned and managed devices to access their cloud data, at least for some services. Um, Microsoft Office 365 does have the ability to say, this isn't a computer that we own. Uh, don't allow it to access any of the services, but that's typically just not enabled. That creates an IT headache um, for device management, especially in like a mobile workforce. But without really looking at the logs and the activity that are available from these cloud services, oftentimes that access from non-corporate issued devices isn't detected. Um, when we work on data breach cases, often, we see that it's, logins from IP addresses in Nigeria for compromised accounts, and they're not even aware it's happening until there's some sort of event that happens that causes them to do the investigation.
Okay. So this actually isn't a question, it's just asking for clarification. If an employee is using their personal iPhone to access their company email, are they able to save attachments without initial detection?
Um, they are, unless that device is under mobile device management, right? So unless the company has pushed out like a security policy or containers to that employee's phone, um, you can use your iPhone and save attachments that you see through the Apple Mail app on your iPhone to your iCloud Drive.
And then the final question that we have, is there a way for a company to limit sending emails to a personal account?
You can blacklist domains. And email addresses. The problem is that becomes an IT nightmare, right? I don't think most companies would do very well if they weren't able to send any emails to and from Gmail or Outlook.com or Yahoo. You can block individual email addresses, but that becomes a huge list of emails to maintain. Um, More often than not, if the companies have the budget for it and the staff to maintain it, there is that class of data loss prevention or DLP type software that can actually it'll inspect emails and their attachments for certain types of information, and if it's found, it will block them. So you see it in a lot of like finance companies and banks where if it contains a social security number or certain types of banking information, it'll get blocked on the way out if it's not encrypted in some way. But that can be expensive and a lot to manage, especially for some smaller companies.
And we just had another one come in. O365 logs, how long do they last?
By default, 90 days, unless the company's sort of taken some steps to um, either buy additional storage from Microsoft or they have something in place that will offload them somewhere else. The other thing worth noting on that is um, it's worth noting and reviewing those audit settings, right? What are you actually logging in Office 365? Because if there is an event and we go there and there's no logs, there's really no way to turn them on retroactively and get access to that information.
Right. It looks like there aren't any more questions. Chad, any final thoughts before we wrap up this afternoon?
No, thanks everybody for attending. Hope you found it valuable. Follow up if you have any questions, and don't don't neglect the cloud on your next examination because it's pretty much guaranteed to have some additional info there.
Perfect. Thanks, Chad.